Welcome to HubSpot's Unconventional Business podcast. I'm your host, James Gilbert. The best companies are the ones that make it incredibly easy and delightful to do business with. It's seamless, frictionless, intuitive. It's not just a better experience, they're actually disrupting our very notion of what consumers should be able to expect from companies. You see, Aussies and Kiwis are a hard bunch to please. We have some of the highest expectations in the world, and luckily for us, our homegrown businesses know this. This season, on HubSpot's Unconventional Business, you'll be meeting some of our best homegrown brands as they share how they're growing and winning by disrupting the customer experience. Let's meet today's guest. Today's guest joins us from a very exciting Australian brand and leader in the e-commerce space. They've disrupted their industry and they look like they've had a lot of fun while they're doing it. Welcome Peter Sloterdyk, the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Technology Officer at Koala. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
So I think a lot of people in Australia by now are pretty familiar with Koala, but for those people that might not have encountered your brand or one of your pretty funny billboards, can you give them a bit of an explanation on what Koala is and what they do?
Absolutely, I can. Koala is a furniture and lifestyle brand that is focused on sustainability, simplicity, and taking all of the consternation out of the e-commerce experience as much as possible. Our goal is to be as simple and straightforward about our offering to ensure that we're doing everything we can to do right by the world and the earth that we inhabit. And like you said, have a fair bit of fun doing it while we're at it.
So how did it actually get started? So I think that speaks to like the brand as it is now. I think when it started was purely mattresses online, was it?
Yep, absolutely. So we started as the colloquial bed in a box brand, one of the first to the scene in Australia. Mitch and Danny, the co-founders, saw a really big opportunity in the space, specifically around mattresses, but always with the idea that we would become a furniture brand. And so the idea was take all of the friction, all of the challenge, all of the kind of negative pieces of the experience of buying a mattress out of the experience altogether. How can we make it extremely simple, make it as risk tolerant as possible, right? So we've got our 120 night trial. We've got really fast delivery in our major metro areas. So all of this can happen because Mitch and Danny set it up in a way that was really direct and simple and taking all of the, for lack of a better phrase, bullshit out of the experience. And
the name Koala, like why that name?
So there's a fair few pieces of lore around the Koala name and how we got there.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it is a beautiful Australian representation, right? The name is because the business was built on Australian roots, truly with the idea that it's all designed in the context of Australia. Everything we're doing is based in Australia, although of course we're looking to export it globally. And Koala is one of the best representations of a true Australian brand.
That makes sense. I feel like it's there is the Australian made logo. I'm not sure if you've seen before, which is a kangaroo. I think if you can't get the kangaroo, Koala is probably the absolute next best.
Absolutely. Exactly. You've got koala, kangaroos, and wallabies, right? Like that's about what you got to choose from.
Do you do something around koalas though as well? I feel like I read a while ago about some program you do.
Yeah, so we have a great partnership with the World Wildlife Foundation. So for every mattress you buy, we adopt a koala. Basically, it's through a donation experience to support all of the conservation work and habitat protection work that World Wildlife Foundation is doing specifically in Australia. We have a few other animals that we support with some of our other products: the turtle, the giant sea turtle, the black cockatoo. There's a few others, and we will continue to expand that partnership as we expand our range because we're really proud of the work that we get to do with World Wildlife Foundation.
When you started, I know purchasing a mattress online was a very new experience. I think people had previously always done that in a store. What do you think made that experience work? Like, why were people willing to do that when they hadn't done that for the longest time? And why were companies like you the ones to be able to deliver on that?
So I think one of the really interesting things around e-commerce as just a concept, right, is that it's all happened really quickly. Now, e-commerce has existed for a while, but it continues to build on itself, and new products that we always thought were physical retail experiences are now, participating in the e-commerce experience. It's not just clothes, it's not just Amazon. There are so many other opportunities for us. With the mattress specifically, even expanding to furniture as a category, all consumers in kind of all developed countries are used to that being a physical retail experience. I think the reason customers are today willing, and were willing at the beginning of Koala a few years ago, are willing to sort of take that leap is because we're de-risking the experience. We're giving the 120-night trial. We're making sure that it can get to your door as quickly as possible. We're taking sort of as much as we can towards the instant gratification opportunity within e-commerce. That's part of the beauty of e-commerce, right, is that it can deliver that dopamine hit or the product yourself that you want. It can deliver that really quickly. I think because we took the risk out of it, that allowed an initial subset of people to really engage in mattress and furniture as a DTC concept, as a direct-to-consumer e-commerce concept. Now, what we continue to build upon as an industry, not just Koala, but as an industry, is the beauty of word of mouth, right? So the pool of people that are willing to purchase products online continues to grow because of their community's experience doing so. So that community experience continues to be positive, then the word of mouth continues to be positive, and we continue to bring new customers in. It's a beautiful, virtuous cycle.
One of the things I always wonder about is how long does that cycle go for? Like, I think you touched on it that we're actually probably still early-ish in the e-commerce journey. How, for you, or it sounded like you had a group of like early adopters that were willing to try buying a mattress online and were satisfied, and then they probably tell their friends who were more conservative, less willing to do it, but the word of mouth from their friend made them willing to do it. Like, do you think you're still very early in that addressable market of people looking for a mattress?
I do. I think that we're pretty early in the experience, both on a global scale and in Australia, right? So we have the opportunity. We are currently operating in Japan, and we have our sights on other countries in the near future. And every market is a different experience for sure. The trends are a little bit different. The cultural nuances obviously are a necessary piece of the puzzle. But one of the things that remains true is that purchasing furniture online, mattresses and other pieces of furniture, is still a new experience for folks, right? So we're used to buying clothes, we're used to buying electronics, we're used to buying household goods to some degree. Even the idea of groceries, being purchased online and delivered to your house. All of those are starting to be normalized. So they're probably, 50% ahead of us in terms of furniture being a DTC opportunity, and I believe that the market share that is available is really quite sizable. You talk about like, is there an end to that cycle? I don't know that there's an end to it, but I do think that there's a continuation of it, right? So if you buy just a mattress online, your brain might still not think, oh, I can go buy a sofa, or I can buy an armchair, or a dining room table, or whatever. But it turns out that you can, but there's another barrier to jump over there. So either the word of mouth or advertising or whatever the piece is that kind of tips you over the edge. My job is to identify those opportunities to tip you over the edge and take the leap of buying some of those additional pieces online. So I think this cycle will continue for a good long while.
And I think you've touched on it a bit, that you've expanded as a company beyond mattresses into other forms of furniture. I think we've seen some direct-to-consumer mattress companies go public in the US, and they've had a bit of a tough time. And can you explain why that might be? My intuition thinks, it's probably you only buy a mattress once every 5 years, 10 years, depending on your hygiene levels. So your lifetime value is somewhat limited there. And I'm sure as e-commerce has risen, the cost to acquire a customer is probably pretty high. But can you, this is your world. I'm sure you've noticed that far more than the rest of us. So can you explain? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about some of the challenges that that the bed in a box competitors have had in the U.S. specifically, and even in some in Western Europe. Um, Part of the challenge has been the balance of investment and profit. Some of the challenge has been, where do we invest? What does it look like? Are we investing only in marketing and product development? Can we do all of it at the same time? And then the third component, I think, is really the consumer behavior around, as you pointed out, mattress buying. Every country has a different behavior around mattress buying. For example, in the US, consumers move more frequently in the US than almost any other country.
Oh,
So they're
interesting.
moving on average about every 18 to 22 months. So even before the
Wow.
2 year mark. Yeah, up until they're about 40, 45 years old. And because of that, there's actually a great deal of opportunity in the mattress market specifically, but even more so in the furniture market. So the way that we look at it at Koala is that the opportunity is in range expansion. We will always have what we believe to be the best mattress on the market. We will always be innovating and trying to find new opportunities within sleep, but it's not the only area of focus for us because we believe that there's actually so much more we can do as a brand, that we can apply our belief system and our brand propositions, our unique USPs. We can provide that to the customers through a number of different products in addition to the mattress. So there's a continued focus for us on range expansion while still protecting and supporting our key products.
What, I'm out of curiosity, why that the US, the frequency of moving, is that for employment or what's the driver?
There's a lot of different drivers. We're, as an American, I can say we're a rather impatient and difficult to satisfy consumer in the grand scheme of things. And so we're always focused as a culture, we're always focused on the next best and better. So how can
Yep.
I improve, whether that's from a self-improvement perspective, from an environment perspective, professional, all of those, the same ethos applies that we're looking for the next best and better. And so that really turns in, it kind of influences, I should say, influences the moving behavior or the relocation behavior. Sometimes it's down the street, sometimes it's to another state, sometimes it's to another city. But the reality is that we're always kind of looking for an opportunity for improvement or to better our surroundings, and so that influences the indicator, the inclination to move.
That's really interesting. Do you think COVID is going to change that in any way?
So what we've seen globally and locally in Australia is that COVID has had a really big impact on the way people consider the prioritization of their space, right? So everyone, you could say the home office or the guest bedroom, or even the sofa and the mattress that you have, they were ancillary parts of your lives until COVID became a key component of the way that we live.
Yeah.
So when you're when you're spending so much more time inside on your furniture, you start to really consider what's around you, whether that is a quick refresh of the paint color or the wall art, or the thing you're sitting on or you're sleeping on or spending 8 or 9 hours a day at, whether, be your desk, your sofa, or your bed. From my perspective, it's been really interesting to watch the trends change in terms of where people are prioritizing their spending and where they're prioritizing their time and energy. Before COVID, it was really focused on entertainment, on going out to eat, experiencing kind of the world around them, consumers really globally and in Australia. And now what we're seeing is sort of a refocus on the home. That may impact the frequency with which people move, but it will definitely impact the in levels of investment in the home and the comfort that we have there.
Yeah, I think I'm actually a bit of a homebody normally. I think I have been joined by a legion of people that have been forced to be homebodies, but now are like actually making it more enjoyable to be at home. But it is interesting when you talk about people moving. I think COVID is stripping away some of the reasons people used to have to move. And so then it's a interesting question of whether they'll still do it by choice or whether it was actually a forced thing and now they just don't have to as much.
The entire professional community is getting more comfortable with the idea of a distributed workforce, right? So the points of connection, the physical requirements of being in an office, et cetera, are waning across the world. And so I agree with you. It's really interesting to see some of those main motivators for relocation i.e. a new job or the office moved or whatever the case might be, those are no longer on the consideration set, or they're not as high on the list. And so, yeah, I agree. It will be so interesting to look back 2, 3, 4 years from now and see the spikes or the dips in all of the trends that we are measuring, both from a moving perspective, what we're investing in, how are the arts and entertainment going to recover? What is that going to look like? We have a lot to learn in the next few years.
And so it feels like as a company, there are two ways that you're really expanding. It's how can we expand our range and sell more products to consumers where we've already built trust? And then how do we expand internationally into new markets and bring our offering there? How do you think about those two trade-offs? Because I think it's interesting where as you prove out a model, say in Australia of selling mattresses online, it's like, oh, we could just take this model to all these countries and we could grow that way. But then you have this longer term ambition of selling more furniture to them, more products. And until you've done that, it's not really validated as a concept. And so like, how do you think about balancing doing that longer term, probably more sustainable motion of like, oh, let's really prove that we can sell multiple products to consumers in a market versus like, let's expand to new markets with what we're doing now? I imagine it's probably a constant debate internally.
Well, it's interesting. I think that oftentimes in businesses, especially startups that are turning into growth companies, right, that are kind of edging out of the startup experience and into a mature company, which is where Koala's at, I did disagree. I disagree with the concept that you have to choose one or the other, and that there even needs to be a debate around whether you can expand as a company locally or can you look at additional international markets. What we've seen work thus far is, Japan has been a great learning opportunity for us. What can we export about an Australian brand? What do we need to add cultural nuance to? What does that mean for our product range and influence from a Japanese audience? Obviously, the consumers need something different in Japan than they do in Australia, both from a size perspective, from a way they live, etc. There is a lot at play here, and there's a lot to learn. But what we've found is that there's a great deal of synergy in the idea of international expansion and range expansion, right? They actually end up being a little bit the same conversation internally, because we're always talking about, okay, we know that we want to introduce additional products to solve additional challenges for our consumers, but how globally applicable are those ideas going to be? That becomes a new lens that we apply to all of our product development, all of our marketing ideas, etc. So it really kind of comes together.
Why Japan as a market? I know I've been lucky to experience the growth of HubSpot internationally, and Japan as a market is one that is good, is a big market, and is there a lot of opportunity. It's also a very hard market.
Sure.
There's 200 and something countries, I think, in the world.
196.
There's 196 countries in the world. I think 190 are pretty similar. And then you've got 6 that are radically different. You've got probably like... I always include North Korea in the list. It's very different. South Korea, Japan, Russia, and
China.
And China. But if you take those countries out, most other countries are pretty similar. Like you can almost, make your way through without understanding as much of the cultural nuance. You go to those countries, you need to understand the cultural nuance. It's a very starkly different experience. So with that, why Japan as it sounds like one of your first international markets that you've put a lot of focus on?
Sure. So I'll challenge the premise a little bit in that I think at a surface level, you're right that there are more similarities among countries than there are differences at a very kind of surface level. What is great from a digital product offering perspective is that it's really possible. It's really, easy is not the right word, but it's very possible to adjust your technology, your digital product, whatever it might be, to a particular location.
Yep.
Part of my experience at Netflix was learning about, okay, what adjustments do we need to make to the Netflix brand, to our content offering, to the way that the brand is positioned, et cetera, in a particular country, whether that's Ghana or Japan or Tanzania or Luxembourg, right? All of them are in fact different and their content behaviors are different, et cetera. The same is true for furniture. When you're thinking about the way that you expand, it's just a lot longer process to make those adjustments. And so part of the evaluation internally has always been, okay, is this product, I'm going to use a dining room table as an example, is a dining room table globally applicable? Does everyone have the same requirements for the most part? Does everyone have the same requirements of a dining room table in every country? That dining room table is a good example to say, like, yeah, pretty much everyone's looking for a 4, 6, or 8 seater. Everyone's looking for a flat surface to put their food on plates, right? Like, it's not a terribly nuanced concept. How people use a dining room table is nuanced, but not necessarily the product itself. But when you start thinking about a sofa, indeed. But when you start thinking about a sofa, it's a completely different experience, right? Because living accommodations are different per country. Even if you take Japan and South Korea, using some of your countries that you were pointing out, Japan and South Korea, Japan is very small space oriented. It's from a cultural perspective, you really live outside the home, and your home itself doesn't need to be anything grand or ostentatious. No one is terribly concerned about a lot of space. And they're trying to make everything wildly efficient in their space. And so we can't launch with a 3-seater sofa in Japan because nobody needs a 3-seater sofa. They're maybe looking for a 2-seater, possibly a 1-seater. And so it becomes a chair instead of a sofa. And so that's when you start thinking about the way that you have to apply differences. I'm going back to your question. I realized that I got off on a tangent. I apologize. But on the Japan front, we chose Japan for 2 key reasons. One, huge market opportunity, low competitive set, right? So we didn't have a lot to fight against in Japan. And the second opportunity for us was around the fact that there is a connection, culturally speaking, between Japan and Australia. The Japanese community has an appreciation for Australian-made products, for Australian-designed products, for the Australian culture. So there was a really great opportunity to export an Australian idea, an Australian brand, and an Australian product to the Japanese audience.
And how was that journey been? Has that initiative pushing into Japan been successful from the start? Has there been interesting learning hurdles through it? Or what's it been?
Extremely interesting learning hurdles. So when we first launched in Japan, before I joined, but when we first launched in Japan, we truly exported the brand. We made very little in terms of adjustment or cultural nuance adding to the brand. And so we actually launched with our sarcastic tone in Japan. Well, it turns out that sarcasm doesn't exist as a cultural thing in Japan at all. There is no such thing as sarcasm.
Sarcasm is a high risk form of humor to take to other countries. It really is.
Yes. And especially Australian sarcasm, right? Because Australian sarcasm is like built into the ethos of the Australian way of life. It is part of how the Australian community communicates with one another. Even Australian sarcasm doesn't work in the UK or America or Canada, right? In the same way. And so we did absolutely make a mistake by launching in that way without kind of, thinking more critically about it. We learned really, really fast. We were able to change course and adjust. Thank God for being a nimble, small, agile company that can make those changes really quickly. And we learned on the fly, we made changes on the fly, and now we are really solidly successful in the context of Japan. I'm very proud of the team there and all the work that they're doing on a daily basis to increase awareness, to drive additional interest in the brand, and it's really working.
That's amazing. The sarcasm bit, the Australian sarcasm, Koala as a brand has really played into the Australian sense of humour in Australia in a really effective way through its billboard advertising. And that's certainly how I first came to know about it. And I've definitely shared some of your billboards around. Can you talk a little bit around like that strategy? It's interesting that we haven't given, as you pointed out, the Australian sense of humour. I actually haven't seen many brands do that as well. In fact, I don't think I've seen any brand do it as well in Australia. Like, can you talk a little bit about that process and its effectiveness?
Absolutely. Thank you for the compliment. You know what, and I can only take credit for things that have happened in the last 6 months. I want to be very clear that none of the fantastic billboard stunts that took place in the last couple of years were my idea by any means. However, I can talk about the strategy and the ideas that go into it. There is a specific privilege associated with being a small, nimble, young company that has low awareness. And that is that when you take a risk, like a highly sarcastic billboard, or even kind of inching on like the poke being too hard, that sort of thing, it's very low risk for the brand, because if you have low awareness and it doesn't resonate or it doesn't work, there's not a whole lot to lose, right? There's really not a lot of negative impact to the brand. However, if it works, which in this case it did, it has magnificent positive impact on the brand because it launches you into the zeitgeist. And that's, something all of us marketers are always trying to do, is participate in culture, maybe even turn a cultural moment into something interesting for our brands. And that's something that Koala did really, really well from the outset, was see a lot of these competitive opportunities to sort of, I don't know, take the piss out of one another, right? And really be quite fun about it. Some of the stuff really worked and some of it didn't. But you guys, the general public isn't aware of the stuff that didn't work because we were only getting coverage on the stuff that did. And that's a really specific privilege for a young startup. Qantas couldn't take the same risk because their brand is too well known, is too ubiquitous across Australia, that if they make a mistake, they have a price to pay, right? For a much longer period of time than a newbie startup does. So now we're in this really interesting middle zone where not everybody in Australia knows who Koala is. We're getting there. We're working real hard to make that the case. But as we get there, we have to bring in our cheeky sense of humor and just turn it up a little bit, mature it a little bit, right? And bring the brand forward so that we're talking to a larger audience of people and we're not ostracizing anybody, which is a really delicate dance. And we will make a mistake. We'll kind of adjust course as we go, hopefully continue to have some of that benefit of being a slightly smaller company, where we'll continue to learn as we grow and figure out and really nail that tone of voice so that we're not losing what makes Koala awesome and fun and cheeky and weird and hilarious. But we are kind of turning up the brand into that next level of maturity as we grow.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that sometimes what helped you get to where you are can't be the thing you do to get to a further stage of growth. And it's like, how do you navigate that, I think, is really the question of why some brands grow to be huge businesses and some hit a ceiling that they can't seem to get past.
It is a tricky problem to solve. And going back to your kind of comments around the competitive set, that it also factors into what we're trying to do from a range expansion perspective, right? So we never intended to be a single product company. That wasn't ever our goal, but it is a challenge. You're right. It's a tricky dance to figure out how to continue the spirit of innovation, continue to sort of fan the flames of innovation in a company as you get more mature, right? You've got to keep the bedrock and the foundation in the right place, but you also have to provide the space, the energy, the opportunity to make mistakes, to fail fast, and to innovate. And so what I've found in my experience, and specifically at Koala, is trying to really create and protect that innovation space is really important for all of us at Koala. There are folks who are solely responsible for really seeing through the daily activities of our business. And then there are folks whose key responsibilities are innovation, thinking outside the box, et cetera. And I find that separation or bifurcation of responsibilities can be really helpful. Even if you rotate them on a monthly or quarterly or even annual basis, there can be a lot of value in really just giving one person or a group of people, a team of people, the opportunity to only innovate and be really focused on that. That's one way to keep the spirit of it alive.
And do you do that by, I know some brands, they pick a geography as their, like, this is the market we'll run a lot of our experiments in, depending how they go, we'll roll them out globally or not. Do you do that, or how do you think about it?
So we do that from a marketing perspective, but not from a product perspective. So the fun thing for us is that, our goal is always for our products, our physical products, to be as ubiquitous as possible, right? Unique and interesting, but as ubiquitous as possible across Australia and any other market that we operate in. From a marketing perspective, we're always testing and learning in smaller geographies. We change the geography frequently so that we're not getting stale in our information, and that we're not stagnating among a particular group of consumers. But that geographical distinction is really, really important for us as we learn how to position ourselves across the various regions of Australia, and then certainly as we grow internationally.
And I think so. One of the things that it sounds like is happening is your approach has had to somewhat change from the start, even though it was by design from the start. And when you started, buying a mattress online or buying furniture online was extremely uncommon, and you've kind of proven that people are willing to do that. Is the version of that you're facing now furniture more broadly, or what is the thing that Koala as a brand is trying to do now that is far less common, but you're seeing the early signs of success around?
So I think the far less common piece for us right now comes through the brand in two very key ways. One is in the service and the level of service that we provide, and then the second is in the product. Both are equal within our company, and I think it's really important to note that everything we do is about putting the customer at the center, right? So we're not a revenue or a profit first company. We're not a process or policy or logistics company first. We are a customer first company that is 100% focused on making sure we're doing the right thing by the customer. That means that from a customer service and experience perspective, that we will always go above and beyond because we believe it's the right thing to do. We will do everything we can to honor the 4-hour delivery. We will do everything we can to ensure that the product you get is exactly what you wanted it to be, and that it's serving the purpose you needed it to be, and we'll fix it if it's not. All of those commitments are core to the way we operate. And then on the product side, it's really a similar ethos in terms of what problems are we solving for the consumer. So, we start, oftentimes a lot of our product development starts with the question of what's annoying, frustrating, or impossible about X. Buying a dining room table, buying a sofa, buying a mattress, all of those are the blanks, right, that we're filling in, is what's really frustrating about those experiences and how can we make it better? Whether that's our no tools assembly or the simplicity of our furniture design, implementing strong ergonomics in everything that we're doing from a seating perspective, making sure that everything that we're doing from a product development perspective is as sustainable as possible. That is never a finished journey. We're always trying to do better in terms of taking care of the earth and doing our part for sustainability. But that's how we think about our continual challenges in front of us, is always asking the questions from the point of view of the customer. And we found that to be a really generous guiding light in all that we're doing.
I forget the name of the brand. It was a shoe company in the US. I think it was called Shoe Dazzle or something. I was listening to an interview with the founder a few years ago, and he was talking about the pain of free returns as an e-commerce company and how much that can chew away at your margins and how much that was problematic for his company, and that he was in a bind because it's kind of become an industry norm. But if it's embraced at a material level, it really hurts your ability to run a sustainable business. I imagine you would have that tension as a company too, where it's we want to give the best customer service possible. That's why we've got our return policy as generous as it is. But boy, if a certain percentage of our customers return mattresses, it's going to make it hard for this business to be sustainable. What has that been like for you as a brand?
I think oftentimes e-commerce, for some reason, and this is not a comment on the shoe brand that you're talking about in the States, but for some reason, there is an association of mid to low level quality with e-commerce, right? And so the propensity to return is much higher for the consumers because they're not getting what they thought they were getting, or they're not happy with the quality of the product, or it doesn't fit, or if it's shoes or if it's an outfit or clothing, oftentimes fit is really challenging to do in online e-commerce shopping. And so I actually really think it goes back to the product itself, and how we are communicating with the consumer about what the product is. When I hear about the challenge of free returns or returns in general from an e-commerce perspective, my first question is about the quality of the product that's being returned. One of the things that Koala really benefits from is that we're able to offer a 120-night free trial, able to offer free returns, etc., because we really believe in our product, right? And it has proven over the last 5 years to be a really sustainable business model, to have the highest quality product we can possibly offer our consumers and do the free returns, because we're not getting returns for quality reasons. We're getting returns for, that I'm in the 3% of people that mattress is just not quite right for. Oh, I measured incorrectly, so the sofa doesn't fit, or like that kind of thing. But we're not getting returns because I don't like this product. And that is a really big benefit to our business, and part of why the business model is working for us.
How do you balance that against competitors as well? Because I feel like, is there any, I don't know, tension where, as you've seen more and more competitors pop up, I feel like in the direct-to-consumer mattress space, something happened where I've never seen so many people try to copycat a business before. It really was the in vogue thing to do about 6 years ago, is start a direct-to-consumer mattress company. I assume some of them tried to compete on quality as well. Did that make it harder for you as a company, or no, being earlier in that space, having built more trust in that space, kind of differentiated you for the long term?
Yeah, so we continue to benefit from our longevity in the space in comparison to our competitors, and from a relationship with the customers, right? I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that word of mouth really goes very far for us, because we have a trusting relationship with our existing customers that then benefits a lot of our new customers as well. I think the competitive set is always an interesting conversation to me, and this is a personal view, that when you're thinking of, if you spend most of your time as a marketer or as a business leader thinking about your competitive set, then you're not spending enough time thinking about your company and how you're leading or going forward, right? So if you're always looking sideways, you're never looking forward. That I mean, there's, I think, 35 different ways to say that particular phrase, but my point in doing so is that I want to be aware. I want to know what's happening in the competitive set, but I'm really focused mostly on providing the best experience to our customers that Koala can do. And if there's something I could learn from the competitive set, even direct competitive versus the sort of ancillary competitive set, oftentimes there's a lot of learning available, but it's how you apply it under your brand's lens. So for me, how do I apply it under a Koala lens, that I think is the most important.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's weird. We were chatting with some previous guests around, there's something intangible that consumers pick up on when a brand is being authentic versus when a brand is just a copycat. And it insulates the authentic brand, and it makes it hard for the copycat brand to get any meaningful form of traction. And I think that's what we have seen play out in the mattress space. What do you put that down? What do you put that down to? So I want to understand this phenomenon more, because it's real, but it's hard to articulate.
It's really hard to articulate, and I'm not sure that there's data that's going to help us pin it down or answer. I agree. You've articulated it better than I've been able to in the past, that sort of insulation of the, we'll call it the champion, or the first, the champion brand that was first to market, and it was able to build the long-term relationships. I think it's really, I put it down to honesty, transparency, value proposition, right? The way that the original brand is presenting themselves. And that's where I think competitive analysis can get really distracting, right? Because if you're looking at your competitive set, oftentimes that's with a really short timeline view. So you're looking at, a month or maybe a couple of months to see what they've been up to. And it can inevitably, it will impact the way you're thinking about how you provide your brand to the customer. And I think that's a really dangerous space to be in, because you're you're not always aware of that influence in the moment, right? And so
Mhm.
inevitably that's taking you away from your brand ethos. It's taking you away from the way you think about the brand. And so it's really important for me to stay centered on our core ethos, what we believe in, our core values, and how we're presenting that to the market, so that
Yeah.
we remain genuine in the space.
The one thing I've wondered about with Koala is when you started, and even probably to date, you had such a strong Australian brand identity, and so much was seemingly built around the Australian market. It sounds like that's been an advantage going into markets like Japan. Going into markets like the US, how have you found that transition? Are those things an advantage? I imagine it's a far more noisy environment in the US, and so to get cut through is tricky. I think the Australian sarcasm would probably be dangerous for a brand to do in the US. Like, what have you found to work?
It's interesting. So the US is sort of always on my peripheral. I am based in the US and I am an American myself. So, we're not launching in the US anytime soon, but it is
Mhm.
interesting to sort of watch the competitive space both in Western Europe and in North America, because it's complicated, right? It's really
Mm.
crowded. It's really complicated from a messaging perspective. More than anything, consumers are confused and overwhelmed, and so they end up in choice paralysis, which is something that Koala spends a lot of time focused on. How do we not put our customers in choice paralysis? We want to be as simple as
Mhm.
possible. And so when I look at the consumer landscape in our competitive set in markets that we may or may not be in the future, it's really challenging to figure out, okay, how are we going to solve that? What would it look like for us to solve that consumer paralysis, that overwhelming sense of choice? And because there's 100 and I'm sure there's 150 plus competitors in just the mattress space in the United
Yeah.
States. And that's insane, right? Like that's crazy. But again, the beauty of sort of the broad view is that if there's 150 competitors that are operating and they're all about doing the same thing, close to doing the same thing in any industry, whether it's mattresses or elsewise, um, the brand that chooses to do it differently, to operate differently,
Mhm.
is going to be the one that succeeds.
Yeah.
Not to use my experience again, kind of previous company, but Netflix and Blockbuster, right? It's kind of the age old story of Blockbuster was going to overtake Netflix. It was in every investor's mind that that was going to happen eventually, and it just didn't turn out that way because Netflix chose to operate differently than the market
Mhm.
expected them to. And I really believe that's the way to be successful in very crowded marketplaces.
Do you think, though, people have wised up to that dynamic? It feels like absolutely that. I mean, even most of the guests we have on this show are successful companies, and they're successful companies because they did
Mhm.
something that at the time was unconventional but turned out to be true and what people wanted, and now has become conventional, and with that movement has seen their success. I don't think if you were to chat to executives who are facing this dynamic today where they have slowly become the old way of doing things, I think they would be on to this dynamic and understanding that, like, no, we have to actually, we can't just take our physical store and put it on an e-commerce shop. We need to radically change the way we treat
Yep.
customers and do it in a digital first way, do customer centric way. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I truly believe that it is not a lack of awareness. So if
Mm.
you are using your example, if you're in the company that is quote unquote doing it the old way, or kind of stagnating in the old way, inevitably every story that we've seen in the past is that there are always canaries in the coal mine. There are always people raising the red flag in those companies saying, I think we need to do it differently. I think we got to turn around. I think we've got to
Mm.
put this under a different lens. The challenge is that leadership in those companies usually struggles to hear that because they're
Hmm.
focused on short-term revenue goals, right? They're focused on delivering that next quarter's profit, and which is real. That's a necessary
Yeah.
business practice, but it disallows them from seeing the longer term strategy, the larger picture that would allow them to notice, hey, we probably need to change course. And then the second piece is that inevitably, or usually I should say, those companies are very large, which makes it really difficult to change strategy, core products, the core offering, right? Because it is entrenched in thousands of people. And the way that that company works, it's trying to turn an oil tanker around, and it's really hard. So it's not because people don't make the effort. Most of those companies have innovation groups. They've got, groups of people that are really focused on trying to prevent that from happening. But it is a challenge for leadership to be able to hear those recommendations and then be able to act on them, because turning that ship around is really difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of our previous guests, they sold tiles online, and that tile market was very established in the physical world. And the way it was established was through franchises. And so like James's tile shop, and I have franchisees all around the country selling tiles. But if I start an online store, my franchisees aren't going to be happy that they're losing sales in their geography to our online store. And so even to your point, I think as some big companies have expanded, their incentive alignment and structure is diametrically opposed to the opportunity.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
And is actually like an extremely real blocker. Yeah.
It's a huge blocker, but I think, so that's a really good, I'm going to use your tile shop because I like that example. That is a really huge opportunity for me for innovation, right? The way that I look at that opportunity is, okay, so if we just launch an online store, that is going to hurt my franchisee's business. So how do I bring them in on the scheme? How do I get them to participate in the experience so that they can replace the revenue they're going to lose from the brick and mortar experience and replace it with the online experience? So it's still a physical product. You've still got logistics in place. And so maybe the closest franchisee to the person who's ordered the tile is the one delivering it and getting the revenue for it, or there's a revenue split agreement or that kind of thing. Oftentimes, I think what is challenging for companies is that they stop at my franchisees, my stakeholders, my boss, my person, my customer won't like it. So they just stop, right? That's the end of the conversation. Instead of going, okay, they're probably not going to like it. How do I change that? How do I do something about that? It's the second question that seems to not get asked very often.
That is 100%. I love that. I think that in that example solves it. I think if any of those tile bosses are listening to this, they're probably going to be kicking themselves. They probably paid some management consultant a crazy amount of money, and it was just like, no, the simple answer is you change it this way. Done.
Yep.
Next.
Bring them in.
Next. Yeah, exactly. But I think that second question is a really interesting insight, where it's true of a lot of things, and definitely in business, where people seem to stop at the first objection, where there's more nuance than that, and actually a hybrid approach, or there's ways that you could take that objection and take like attributes around it to help solve the problem that's even probably more powerful than the original idea itself. I love that. Hopefully we're not going to get some hate mail from these tile bosses, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Right.
And so
it was hypothetical. It's okay.
Yeah. And so you as a brand, how are you insulating against falling into that trap as you've become more mature? It sounds like you're doing a lot around the innovation as it comes to marketing, and you do a lot of research around product lines. But is there more than that? I feel like the threat is so large, and it's so common that as companies mature, they open themselves up to competitors in areas of their structural weakness. How are you thinking about that as you mature?
So the number one challenge that we're all facing is not getting paralyzed by that fear of the unknown, right? The thing that we can't answer, that we don't know is coming, etc. You can do a lot for risk mitigation. You can do a lot for preparation strategies, etc. But when that work is done, that needs to be enough. That needs to be satisfying enough so that you can focus on your business and what's happening around you and in the near-term future, the things that you can see and can predict. I think for Koala, there's two key benefits to the way that we are growing right now. So every time we end up with, every time we hire somebody new, we're adding a significant amount of variety to the way we think about things, right? And so oftentimes, if you think about a company that's only, let's talk about a company that's hiring 5% new staff every year, right? But against a rather large company, that 5% has a hard time influencing or bringing new ideas to the table because they're joining a large machine in motion, right? But for something like, for Koala, what's really great about us being a small and nimble and exciting company on that front is every time we add a new voice to the mix, they are loud, they are empowered, and we want to hear from them because we don't ever want to get stuck in the rut of doing things the same way over and over again because that's just what works. That's not the way that you build a sustainably built company. And so I think that's one of the key ways that we really bring those new voices to the table and pay attention, listen really closely to what they're saying and what they're observing, because oftentimes they can see a lot of things that we can't after you've been in the business for 2, 3, 4 months or 2, 3, 4 years. It's very hard to see things that the new people can.
Well, I think this show has all been around unconventional approaches and how businesses have taken those to be successful. I think the thing that we're increasingly focusing on is that's a state that you have to constantly live in if you want to remain successful. And I think that approach that you've outlined is really going to help you achieve that. So congratulations on the success so far, and best of luck for everything in the future. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on today. I really appreciate it. It was great to chat with you.
Thanks for tuning in to Unconventional Business by HubSpot. If you liked what you listened to, please subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next episode.